Okay, in this video we're going to go over the installation procedure for the Vagabond Motorsports Fender Eliminator kit for the brand new Kawasaki Z650. But before we get to the installation process for the Fender Eliminator kit, I'd like to go over some of the key details of the Vagabond Motorsports kit for the 2017 and newer Kawasaki Z650 and Ninja 650 bikes, so the naked and the faired version of the Kawasaki 650 twins. So this Fender Eliminator kit is designed specifically for those, meaning the bikes are laser scanned and we do CAD models based on those scans. And so this should be a perfect fit and finish. The components are made from a single piece of CNC laser cut and CNC bent 5000 series aluminum. They're coated in a UV resistant satin black powder coat, so it should be an extremely durable and kind of long lasting part. Some of the unique features of the Vagabond Motorsports kits are that we include rubber bumpers to minimize license plate buzzing. We also have a construction kind of very unique in the industry where the side flanges are tucked in and the extra studs are passed through. So two thicknesses of sheet metal have that stud passed through it, which means these side flanges are actually structural gussets as opposed to just kind of being license or turn signal mounts. So a very stiff construction. The studs make an underside totally flush, very clean appearance, very minimal use of kind of loose hardware, so it's a very easy installation process. The hardware we do include are 2 stainless steel washers to be used in tightening up the license plate light, and then 4 flange lock nuts to be used on these 4 studs to attach the Fender Eliminator to the motorcycle. So the approach for the Vagabond Motorsports Fender Eliminator kits is to reuse OEM hardware where it's high quality and where appropriate. In the case of the Kawasaki, the license plate light and the turn signals are both pretty high quality units, both DOT approved, and so reusing them makes a lot of sense. And so that's why you see on this license plate flange you kind of have the 3-hole pattern, and on these side flanges you see these kind of unique, almost peanut shaped patterns that are designed specifically to reuse your OEM hardware. So we like to think of this kit as like an OEM grade version of a Fender Eliminator. So with that, let's get started on the installation process. As for tools you're going to need for the installation of the Fender Eliminator kit, you're going to need a 4 and a 5mm Allen head, either T-handle or just regular old L keys, Phillips screwdriver, and an 8 and a 10mm hex socket and a ratchet, and having a little extension on that helps. As for some alternatives, if you have a power driver and all the bits you need for it, that'll speed things up quite a bit. Alright, so to start the installation procedure, first step's going to be to remove both the passenger seat by twisting the key in the tail section of the bike and lifting it forward and off, and the rider seat, which is actually just going to pop off once the passenger seat's off. So take both those seats and set them aside, and we're going to work on the side panels of the motorcycle. Okay, so once the seats are off, then we have to take both the right and left side panels off the motorcycle, and this bike is these white panels. We don't actually have to take the black plastic section off, but to take the side panels off, on the top part of the motorcycle there's 2 8mm hex head bolts for each panel, and then 1 front 4mm Allen head key bolt that we need to remove, and then the panel's going to slide. And so we'll start with taking the 4 8mm bolts out, and you're going to reuse or reinstall this hardware, so set it aside and don't lose it. And then the forward facing, or the front bolt, so 4mm hex head, same thing, set it aside, take it out, set it aside. And this is actually the double panel mount, so the rear side panel goes underneath this kind of middle black plastic panel. And to remove the side panel, you're going to kind of hold it as kind of well support it so you're not just tugging on one piece of plastic, and slide it rearward. And you'll see there's some teeth that are going to key in to the panel. And you'll see the right side panel exposes the electrical connectors we're going to get to, and then right on the other side, on the left or shifter side of the motorcycle, there's again another 4mm Allen head bolt that you have to remove to get to the left side panel. So remove that, grasp the side panel gently and click it rearward, and again set it aside. So all this is going to get reinstalled. And once the side panels are off, you can see kind of where the Fender Eliminator, or Fender and future Fender Eliminator is going to mount, as well as the wiring harnesses on the right side of the bike. Now speaking of those wires on the right side of the bike, you're going to remove all three of these connectors. So there's a tail light connector that's on the inside, deep inside of the tail section, but anything on the right side of the frame rail, subframe rail, you're going to remove. So there's two black connectors, the most rear of which is the license plate light, and there are two more that you push the tab on the kind of front face of that connector down to remove two more 2-pinners for the turn signals. And if you need a little bit of help, you can put a small flathead screwdriver in and lift that tab up, but you should be able to do it without any tools. Now while you're here, the other thing you're going to need to remove are these two 8mm hex head bolts that are going from the tail light down into this undertail. And you're incorrect in thinking, hey, I don't need to remove my tail light for the fender, and that's true. However, we are going to need to kind of pull down that rear undertail a bit to get access to one kind of stubbornly located, and I'm not really sure what its true function is except to make the OEM fender difficult to remove. So we're going to have to pry down this plastic panel a bit to get access to one more screw, and so releasing the tail light allows all that to happen. So once you've got all the wiring released and the tail light kind of decoupled, so it's going to kind of float here on this rear mount, we're ready to take the rear fender off. And so there's four 5mm hex head bolts that are, 5mm Allen head key bolts that you're going to remove. You can either use a power driver like this or a regular Allen key. So you can take the first couple out all the way. Obviously set these aside. We actually aren't going to reuse these, but they're nice bolts and you may want to keep them, but don't mix them up with the other factory bolts. Once you get to your last bolt, and these may have, or probably will have, a relatively high strength thread locker on it, you need to be a little careful of taking that last one out without having released it first. And so you'll see when we drop that, this whole panel, rear tail section, kind of sags, and that's okay. We don't want to push down on it and break anything, but you'll let it sag. And we're going to move the camera because there's one more bolt that's not actually allowing the factory fender to release from the undertail, and it's a little tricky to get to, and we'll go over that next. Okay, so there's two things to notice when you kind of pry down this. So you're gonna have to just push gently. I mean, I don't want you to break anything. But you'll see there's the three wires that you disconnected, the looms. They're actually being held with a little white clip. So we're gonna push those wires out now. And then once that's done, these three harnesses are ready to remove with the factory rear fender. And so there's a Phillips head screw here, and it's going to be a little tricky to get to. Let's see. There you go. And it shouldn't be that tight. I mean, all it is a plastic thread cutting screw, so you're going to have to kind of get access to it with, hopefully you'll have a Phillips head screwdriver that has a long enough shank to kind of go down this low. And you may get a little bit of hassle here. It's not exactly well positioned to kind of go through a specific hole, at least not with this kind of thick shank screwdriver I have. But what you can do is you can either kind of push it down as far as I've got it. You can see, you kind of come at it with an angle, and as long as you put good pressure onto the head of the screw, you're not going to have an issue with stripping it. The other option is get a really short stubby screwdriver, and you can see all it does is a little plastic thread turning screw that goes in here. So think of it as just part of the challenge of lopping off that massive rear fender. So take that plastic thread cutting screw out, set it aside. You will not be reusing that, and then gently guide your three wiring looms out with your factory fender, and we'll take that to the bench and break it down. So once you've got the fender off the bike, we're just going to split it in half and take the lights out of it. And there's two Phillips head screws actually on this side. So 1, 2 that you're going to remove, and then an 8mm hex head bolt. And I recommend starting with the 8mm hex, just so that it's not trying to split apart on you. And once you've got it out, you'll see there's a stud, and it's connected to that reflector. So take that out, because the reflector stud is actually kind of pinning that in position. And so we'll get the 2 Phillips head screws out of here, and you're not going to need any of this hardware to install the Fender Eliminator, but you may want to keep it and put your Fender kind of back to stock. The only thing holding this thing together right now is this. There's a tiny little tooth between the 2 halves that'll kind of split like that, and so if it hasn't unclipped naturally, it will when you kind of start to pull it apart. So now you're left with 2 halves essentially, and we'll start with the left or shifter side, because it only has the turn signal in it. And to remove the turn signal, all we're really going to do is remove that Phillips head screw that's holding a cover plate onto the turn signal. So the Kawasaki signals are kind of nice. This stuff you all do need to reuse. So there's a little Phillips head screw. You take this cover plate off, set that aside as well. There's an internal plate in here, and so using a small screwdriver, it's easy just to kind of pop it out. That's going to be on the loom, but it can thread off, so you keep that. And then the last bit for the Kawasaki signals is to kind of grasp the signal and pull it out, like just actually like tear it out of the assembly. And what you'll see is there's kind of a there's a little divot on the front end, or actually the rear end, excuse me, that'll make this easier to come out. So I'm going to rotate it out, and what you'll see is that there's a kind of groove in it, and it's meant to kind of snap in and out like that. So we'll do that really quickly on the other turn signal. So again, little baby screw, cover plate, pry out the internal plate, and all this stuff is getting reused. We're going to reassemble it on our Fender Eliminator just as if it were the factory. So you'll see our Fender Eliminator has cutouts that mimic this very well, and the whole purpose of that is so this is kind of like OEM grade aftermarket accessory. So then we're going to take off the license plate light, and there are 2 Phillips head screws that have big fender washers on them, and we're going to keep all this stuff as well. And you'll pull the license plate light out, and then we are going to, so there's these 2 nice big beefy gray rubber grommets. We are going to reuse those. And so turn signals, license plate light, and all their associated hardware will transfer over to the Fender Eliminator. What won't transfer are the 2 big shells and the hardware that was used to hold those shells together. So once you've got everything out of the factory or Fender, you're actually ready to start reassembling the lights onto the Fender Eliminator. And so you can tell the Fender Eliminator's got some interesting shaped cutouts that all kind of match the factory cutouts. And so start with the license plate light, and you're going to kind of cram these gray squishy grommets into the holes. And you can see the holes kind of have a D shape, or at least part of the circle clipped off, and that's going to match up with the flats on the grommet. So start by cramming them into those 2 holes, and you can use your other hand on the back side to kind of pull them through and remove any kind of wrinkles you've got. Then you're going to thread the electrical connector through that central hole and simply insert those 2 kind of plastic bosses into the grommets, and then you can move to the rear. And so that's going to give a really nice kind of factory grade grommeted mount. What you'll find though is that if you were to just tighten these up with the factory bolts, you would have a very jiggly light. And you can do that if that doesn't bother you. Just go ahead and put those factory bolts back in. However, Vagabond will include a couple stainless steel washers that are the correct size to slide over the bosses and further compress the grommets. And what that does is you still get the benefits of a grommeted mount, but you are not going to have the jiggly light. So it'll just be a much tighter grommet. And so with your Phillips head screw, you'll just recompress that down and you'll feel it bottom out. You're still bottoming out on that plastic boss, but it's a much tighter fit. And so if you're so inclined, use those included washers, and they need to slide over the boss, so you need to be a little careful with how you position them, but you should feel everything kind of squeezed tighter. And then what you get is it's very firm, so you're still giving some reduction in vibration to that bulb in there, but it's not nearly, so still you can see there's give, which is important, but it's not going to be as bouncy. I mean, the factory one is extremely loose. So once you've got the turn signal on, excuse me, the license plate on, it's time to move to the turn signals. And so thankfully Kawi turn signals are very directional in terms of you're not going to put it in this way, it just looks bizarre. So just for reference, black connector is left and the gray connector is right, but you should be able to kind of look at them and say, yes, the text on the bulbs, the text on the lenses in the right direction. I know what I'm doing. But in any case, thread the connector through. And this is similar to some of our other Kawi parts. This cutout in the Fender Eliminator matches the factory Kawasaki fender cutout very well. So the way you install these is seat. You can see when you look at it from pro side view, there's like a little chamfer, a little angle on that. That makes it easier to rock in. And so you start with seating the front by pushing it down as far as possible into the groove, and then you're going to kind of wrestle it in there. And you should end up with it totally popped in and very cleanly seated. And if you look on the back side, if you don't have a perfect seat, kind of just like a grommet, kind of pull it up and say, in this case, we're good to go. So once you got the turn signal installed, just with like the rubber groove holding it in place, we're going to go ahead and reassemble the factory stack up of kind of retainers. And so start with the internal metal retainer. And this kind of serves as like the nut plate inside. And so these are a little tricky to install. I start with the kind of larger end, this kind of wider end, and shove it under the two little teeth at the front. And so at an angle, apologies if this is a little difficult to see on camera, at an angle I kind of come in, try to go under those two front teeth, and then still with pressure on it, pop it down. And you should see that it is hanging out underneath those four rubber tabs. And so once you've got that, you're going to take, you actually don't need to thread that through, you're going to take one of the cover plates, and that little tooth fits into that little hole, and then install the Phillips head screw. And so on the first one you install, it's going to be really easy, because you can come through with a Phillips head screwdriver and install that. It's actually not that much more difficult for the second one. You just have to be careful not to really grind the screwdriver against the edge of the Fender Eliminator, because you may mar the powder coat finish, which would be a shame. So we'll do the opposite side turn signal, and we'll do that hopefully a little bit faster. So seat it in the groove, and you should, that's kind of the more work you do when seating it at the bottom of the groove, the easier that process is. You see that one just kind of popped right in. Again, then retainer, and oh, I actually messed that one up. Threaded it through the wrong way. Thread the retainer in, introduce it at an angle to the front, and push down until you hear a little pop. So we're in there as well. So then the external retainer, and you'll see things are kind of tight in there between the license plate light and the turn signal, but that's kind of by design. There should be no interference with any of the components. And then, like I was saying, the last tricky bit is to come in here at an angle with your Phillips head screwdriver and just resist the urge to kind of crank up against this edge of your Fender Eliminator, because you will damage the powder coat finish. So once you got both turn signals installed, this part is ready to install on the bike, except for we just need to thread the electrical connector. Start with the larger license plate light connector, and then thread your smaller two turn signal connectors up to that central kind of squarish hole. For this design, you don't need a factory grommet because it goes and makes a quick right turn into a piece of the factory channel. So there really isn't any room for a rubber grommet. And so at this point, once you've got everything assembled as such, it's ready to go onto the motorcycle. Alright, so we're ready to install the Fender Eliminator back onto the motorcycle. What you can see now is this tail section of the bike. I actually have removed the tail light just to make things easier to see. And once you've already taken out these two bolts, it really is just hanging on a little rubber nub back here. And there's a 3-pin electrical connector that is very clear where it goes. And you can disconnect that and pull that if you really need to. There's absolutely no requirement. I'm doing it here just to give you a better view of the installation of the Fender Eliminator. So you can see this black plastic black metal crossbar has a big channel in it, and that is guiding all the cables from your Fender out to the side of the bike before they make connection. And so it's a nice little piece of design, but it does make this part a little tricky, but still relatively straightforward. You're going to start by feeding your 3 electrical connectors. Start with your big turn signal connector, and then follow it with your smaller turn signal connector up through the rectangular hole in the undertail. I would tighten them all up about equally tight, and then you'll see there's this white plastic C-clip, and that's a factory piece, and we shall reuse it in terms of holding the 3 electrical looms for your license plate light and your turn signals under this channel so they don't get kind of loose and pinched when you install that. So that's a nice little feature. But it does make this part a little tricky in terms of managing the cables. But once you've got that, we can kind of button up everything, which is a nice little way to close this out. So as you're pulling your Fender Eliminator up, really the only part you have to do is kind of eyeball the 4 studs in line with the 4 holes in the undertail and the 4 holes in the crossbar, and they should all line up perfectly. And then take one, and you only need one right now, of your flanged lock nuts that are included, and tighten it up, or just at least get it on a few threads. It doesn't need to be tight. This part can still be a little loose, because what we're going to see coming up is how everything kind of gets reassembled, and we do have to put the tail light back on, and we're going to reorient so that it's a little clearer. Alright, so you can see we've got the Fender Eliminator on with just one of the flange head bolts. We're going to put on our tail light in case we removed it. The only thing you need to know is that this wiring loom goes around kind of to the back of one of its plastic mount bosses and under this crossbar. And since there's this boss on the undertail, it's not going to get pinched by this crossbar. But I would recommend kind of recreating factory kind of wire paths as best as possible so that you minimize the risk of anything getting kind of pinched. And I'm just going to lift those out of the way so I can get that connector underneath all the other ones. There we go. So once you've got the connector under the 3 you just ran for the Fender, you can put your tail light back in, and like I said, this cable does go behind that boss and under. That is the factory path. And then we hang it off that little mount, and then we're going to tighten everything back up just as it was when we removed it. Since I removed the tail light, I'm going to put it back together, but that is not, like I said, that's not a requirement for this installation. So once you've got your Fender kind of more or less ready to go back together, you'll have your 3 looms kind of hanging out to the side, and what you should see is that if you lift up the whole assembly, these guys aren't pinched anywhere, they're loose, and your tail light, if you tinkered with it, is also in good shape. And then just by hand, because these don't have, their locking feature doesn't start engaging until you actually bottom out the nut, so they should be very easy to spin down all the way till they make contact, and that's kind of the right place to stop for now. So hand tighten these guys. You'll see the ones on the back are a little bit longer than the ones on the front, just because of the Fender Eliminator design. Goes through 2 flanges of aluminum at the front and only 1 flange on the back. So once you get these hand tight, what I would say is that's the right time to reinstall your 8mm bolts and washers that you originally took off. That's going to connect the tail light to the undertail. And then we are going to connect the wires, and then we can put the bike back together completely. So what you're going to need is your 8mm wrench to tighten up your tail light. And you'll notice I'm not using the power driver here, and that's mostly just preference, but the power driver is a way to easily over tighten a lot of bolts that, especially like this one, that are going through grommets and into plastic clips. Like you can break some factory plastics by going a little crazy with the power driver. So the torque spec on these guys is kind of firm, but you don't want to feel like a hard bottom out. You're going through a rubber kind of washer stack, so there's no going to be a hard stop you're going to feel. Conversely, for the 10mm hex head that you're going to need for the Fender Eliminator, you are fully bottoming a stack up, so there's no rubber in the way. That being said, these are lock nuts, so you'll feel them get tight, and then you'll feel them bottom out, and you're there. You are tightening through a big sheet of plastic, so you're not getting a complete metal to metal to metal bottom out. And so there's no point in over tightening these. You'll see I'm just using a very small wrench and kind of going around. Once they're all tight, make sure I got even tightness. So before we can put the side panels on, the last bit we have to do is reconnect the turn signal and license plate light connectors. And so turn signals are the two small gray and black 2-pin connectors. They're keyed, so you can only install in one way. Just push them in to hear the click. And then the license plate light has the big kind of prong tab on it. Same thing, install that till you get it to click through, and it'll capture itself in that little bracket. One of the things you'll notice is that we do have a decent amount of, call it, extra length now that the Fender Eliminator is on and the factory Fender's not putting the lights way out of the way. So one of the things that I think is probably the cleanest way to approach that is to pull some of that loom back under that frame spar. And that's going to put it into the tail section of the bike where it's not going to get rubbed up on the side panel. And once we get the side panels on, you can see it will have a little bit of kind of a loop in the tail section of the bike. So we'll get to that now. We're going to reassemble the side panels on the motorcycle. The way that I recommend them is to start with the kind of front face and make sure you get it under that middle panel flap. Then you can kind of place it roughly in position, kind of take a sight line down the back of the bike and line up the teeth that are periodically along the tail section, and then slide it forward, and you'll feel all the teeth engage so that it should be kind of stuck on there without any bolts. And then you can go ahead and reinstall the two 8mm hex head bolts on the top surface of the tail section, and the 4mm Allen key bolt on the front. So with that bolt, you're going to need to go through both panels and untighten her up. So do that. 8mm hex on the way. But then after that's complete, we will move on to the left side panel. Same thing, start with the front tab, make sure you're in between the metal tab and the plastic. Kind of get your components lined up, and there's little guide teeth, and then slide it forward. Super easy. I would recommend starting bolts by hand so that you don't cross thread them and then make a mess with a wrench, but just a thread or two. The front bolt, so 3 bolts per side panel. Again, since these are kind of sandwiching through plastic, you just go until they're snug, and that's really all you can do. You can break these tabs off on side panels like this by going too tight. and so you're going to want to avoid doing that. Okay, so once we've got those panels on, really the only bolts you're going to have left over are going to be the four Allen head key, the 5mm that were holding your factory fender on, and that one Phillips thread cutting screw that was holding the factory fender to the undertail. To reinstall the rider seat, you're just going to put that tooth under that tab, and then it kind of just snugly, there's a little rubber piece that kind of snugly goes in a little fork. And so you're going to want to make sure that it kind of goes, you need to make sure you get the front. There we go. So that you can't lift the front up. And then the rider seat is actually, or the passenger seat, is actually what holds in the back of the rider seat. Push it till it clicks, get your key out of there, and you're good to go. So that completes the installation of the Vagabond Motorsports Fender Eliminator kit for the new 2017 Kawasaki Z650. Give you a quick walk around view. You can see there's air gaps, but very minimally so, around all the components. So there's a really tight fit of the license plate light and the turn signals to the factory bodywork. And so we like to think that's kind of the OEM grade version of a Fender Eliminator. Everything fits extremely well and kind of looks like as it should be from Kawasaki. So with that, thank you for watching our video. Our products can be found direct on our website, www.vagabondmotorsports.com, as well as Amazon for you Prime members and eBay. Thank you very much.